One of the most common things that I hear coming out of the trad right wing movement is praises for Japan. This is very, very common coming out of this ideological strata of people. You hear this a lot from trads. You'll hear this from Catholic trads. They'll talk about how, the Japanese are so nationalistic and traditional, and their women are so trad and based. You will hear this sort of thing very commonly coming out of conservatives, especially these younger right wingers. They love to praise Japan, and they talk about how trad Japan is and how orderly it is. And the ones who are race obsessed, and there are a lot of those, they will talk about how Japan is so racially homogenous. It's just a singular race. The Japanese race. People who talk like this are historically inept, and that's putting it nicely. People who talk about how trad Japan is, they're living a fantasy. And it's the fantasy of the grass is greener on the other side. This is something that is very common amongst conservatives. It's very common amongst trads, traditionalists, people who look back to a supposed golden era of history and say, well, I wish we can go back to those days because today is so horrible. The grass is always greener on the other side. This is the catalyst towards this sort of fantasizing. If only I were in this other country, I would be so much more successful. If only I were in this other country, I would have a wife or a girlfriend or whatever. This is when you start idealizing other societies. You start romanticizing about other countries until you go there. And then you start seeing reality. You find out all sorts of horrible things. Because in every country there are horrible things. And in every country there are beautiful things. People talk about how trad Japan is, and they don't know, or maybe they don't care to know, the fact that child pornography was not illegal in Japan until fairly recently. And besides that, let's get into this idea of the singular race of Japan, right? This is a common idea that people have. It's homogeneous, the homogeneity of Japan. Is that even a word, homogeneity? Correct me on that one in the comments. The homogeneous character of Japan. So I am now reading a general history of Japan. I have been reading this for the last couple of days. And I have been reading about the ancient history of Japan, how Japan was originally inhabited by a group of people called, well, we call them the Jomon people. The Jomon people, we see their pottery all throughout Japan. Archaeologists have found their pottery. And these were people who went out and they gathered up berries and different edible seeds and plants, and they put them in jars and saved them, and they ate a lot of seafood and all that stuff. And getting past all of the common jargon of how they were hunter-gatherers and all that, these were the native people of Japan. We're not entirely sure where they came from, but it's likely that they migrated into Japan from the Sakhalin region. That could be false, I'm not sure. It's just a suggestion. But they were other people who migrated into Japan, and they came in from mainland Asia. And eventually you had people who came in from a place called Nara, which was in Korea, and they would migrate into Japan. And there were multiple migrations into Japan from mainland Asia, specifically from Korea. And these migrants migrated into Japan, and they would take certain territories, and Japan ended up being a group of different governments, of different principalities, and different peoples, and they would fight each other. And there was also race mixing that went on between these migrant peoples and the local population. And so there was race mixing. Boom, right there. That disproves all of this nonsense about how Japan is this homogeneous society. And people are going to say, well, that's not an argument because, well, Japan, yeah, in ancient times there was race mixing, but now they consider themselves Japanese and they have established this identity of being Japanese. Oh, so identities change then. Identities change. Take, for example, the Palestinian people. People like to argue that, specifically people who are on the more Zionistic persuasion, they like to argue that the Palestinians are not a real people because the Palestinians are a mixture of different ethnicities that migrated into that region. And you have Jordanians, you have Egyptians, you have Greeks, Italians, you probably have some Spaniards who came in, Turks, Mongols, all sorts of people migrated and settled into the West Bank. And now these people call themselves Palestinian. There was race mixing. There was a lot of race mixing that went on in the West Bank. It still goes on. You even have people in the West Bank who are ethnically Jews, but they identify as Palestinian. So you have race mixing. You have different peoples migrating into one region. But then these people, after living together for such a long time, they begin to identify themselves as a particular people. And that can change as new migrations take place. The fact is, there is no such thing as a singular race of people. There is no such thing as a homogenous race. That is a bunch of fantasy. Kind of like all these people who talk about homogeneity and the homogeneousness of this people. These are the same types of people who go on about how they want to find their trad wife and they can't find one in America, so they fantasize about going to China or the Philippines or Japan or wherever to go find their dream waifu. These are the same types of people. They live in fantasy land. They think that women in Japan are somehow different from the rest of the world. You will find women in Japan who are extremely materialistic, more materialistic than American women. But they live in this fantasy land. So they live in this fantasy land, and part of the fantasy land is this idea of homogeneity, or the singular race of people. Oh, and it's funny how people who talk about being homogenous is somehow this praiseworthy idea. People who talk like this are also people who want to race mix with Asian women. That's another thing. Well, hold on. You guys want to race mix? Race mixing is just a part of the human experience. It's a part of human existence. You're never going to get rid of it. And yeah, people identify as certain national identities, but it doesn't change the fact that those very people are a mixture of different tribes and different ethnicities who settled in their region. You can even go to Scandinavia, and you will find Scandinavians who look different. Some Scandinavians are very blonde, blue-eyed, and they have the stereotypical face of a Scandinavian. But some people are a little bit darker. They have black hair, dark eyes. Some people are mixed in with Sami. And if you don't know who the Samis were, they were the indigenous people of Scandinavia, although it could be that the Samis and the Indo-Europeans migrated and settled there around the same time. I'm not sure. You have Scandinavians who are mixed in with Turkic people. Look at people in Finland. The Finnish language is Ugric, which is a Turkic language. It's right up there in Scandinavia, right next to Sweden and Norway and Denmark. It's just part of human existence. And this whole thing about, oh, these people are homogenous, they never race mixed, that is a load of bullshit. Anyway, hope you guys have learned something from this message. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.